So welcome, Mia. Thank you ever so much for joining me at this virtual summit on coaching for social impact. And you're joining us today to discuss the work you're involved in terms of MacMillan Cancer Support. And I wonder if you could well, first of all, let's say a bit about yourself. Like, who are you? What brought you to this world of coaching?
Sure. Thanks, Nick. Thank you for having me. So yeah, I'm Mia O'Gorman. I'm an executive coach mainly, also do life coaching and some coaching supervision. And I came into this world through starting my career in HR back in the days when it was still called personnel. So quite quickly found my way into leadership development as the specialism that I had a real passion for, and then got the opportunity to start doing some coaching of people in graduate or middle management talent pools. Um, Also had the opportunity to start training leaders in coaching skills, and just sort of ignited a passion for me early on. And I've gradually been able to put coaching more and more at the center of what I do. So I was full-time employed leadership development consultant for around 12 years. And then for the last 3 years, I've worked freelance as a coach and leadership facilitator, supervisor, coach trainer.
Great. So one of the things I'm always struck by when I do these interviews for this summit is that people have got a lot going on. I mean, I'm listening to you describe that. I'm thinking, well, hold on, running your own coaching practice is never a simple thing in the first place. But at the same time, you found time to go, well, I want to give back somewhere else. So I really want to explore that. But first of all, let's get the project on the table so we understand what that is. And then I want to kind of get a sense of how did you get involved and why did you get involved? But perhaps first you can just describe the project.
Yeah, so the product is to provide a well-being coaching service for people living with cancer. And the overall purpose is to help those people take back control in their lives, feel more empowered, and take positive steps forward, whatever area of life that might be for them.
Yeah, great. And how does it work? So broadly speaking, what's the sort of structure that enables the coach that's somewhere in the world to be connected and then do the work?
Sure. So MacMillan have recruited, just recently gone up to 50 coaches providing this service. And the customers come to the coaches through a couple of different routes. People can self-refer from an information page on the MacMillan website. And also if people are using any of the MacMillan support lines, then the service providers there know of the coaching service and kind of keep an ear out, if you like, for people that might benefit from it and can then offer it to them.
Okay, and this is all done, I was talking to you earlier, this is all done by telephone.
Yes, the coaching itself takes place by phone. And that way, it's very simple to hide your number, so everybody's data is kept confidential that way.
Yeah, and it'd be nice to get some sort of logistical facts on the table, if you like. So, what are they contracting for? How many sessions? Like, how long? What's that journey?
Yeah, so it's up to 6 sessions of 1 hour each, spaced fortnightly.
1 hour each, space fortnight. Okay, great. And you mentioned that you yourself, Mia, have about 3 clients at the moment, or 3 customers.
Yeah, that's right. So coaches are asked to give between 1 and 4 hours a fortnight. So that would translates to between 1 and 4 customers at any one time. And I'm currently just working with 2. I've just had 1 finish, but we'll hopefully pick up a third through referral in the next few weeks.
Great, thank you. I mean, it's interesting having this conversation. There's like a sort of mind map that starts to form in my brain of where I'd like to go with this. But let me see if I can rein myself in and start with the one I said I would ask you, which is how there you are, you're a busy coach, you got your own practice going on. You're also confronted, like everybody else, with the coronavirus and the impact that's had. What happens for you that you think, okay, this is something I want to get involved in?
Sure. So it goes back a little while, actually, before coronavirus. Earlier last year, I was at an EMCC organised conference where Peter Hawkins was one of the speakers, and he shared a story about how he'd been doing some work to introduce coaching in Africa, and one of the young leaders there had stood up and sort of challenged Peter really and said, well, what you're doing sounds great, but it sounds like coaching is often expensive individual development for the already highly privileged. And so Peter Hawkins was relating that story and how he'd kind of really felt a big pang of guilt about that, and that really resonated for me. I was already then a couple of years into being freelance, self-employed, so that spurred me on to think about, how could I give back? And from that point on, I was looking for an opportunity to, specifically to use my coaching skills in a way that would give back to the wider community, to people that would not otherwise be able to benefit from coaching. And then around the start of this year, I saw the opportunity to work with MacMillan posted. In fact, it may even have been on the on one of the Animas pages, community pages. So I know there's a number of other Animites already involved in the service.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's really great. And now I know you're doing, in a sense, you're doing this altruistically, but at the same time, there's always going to be something you get from it. And you mentioned you finished with one of your customers recently, and I wonder if you can perhaps share what you took from that journey. Like, what did you learn about yourself as a coach, or about the experience itself? Like, I'm curious, what were your outcomes?
Yeah, so it's been a real reminder for me, I think, of just some of the fundamentals of the benefits that coaching brings in terms of the importance for people of being listened to, hearing their own voice, having someone to kind of witness their experience. And sometimes I come away from these sessions thinking I haven't done much in a way, listening, a little bit of reflecting back, a little bit of sort of questions and summarizing. So in one sense, it's an overused word these days, but it's genuinely quite humbling to hear some of these stories and be reminded of what people do and can endure, and how they then take something positive from that, or turn that around. I think also, because most of the coaching I do is in a kind of a corporate context, and people are often going at 100 miles an hour, organizationally or personally, often striving for what anyone would say are big things. With some of my MacMillan customers, small changes can be incredibly significant. So one person I worked with said one of the things they wanted to progress during the coaching was improving their concentration, because they were finding that if they were watching TV, they also needed to do things on their phone, because just watching a TV program wasn't keeping their mind occupied enough to keep it off their situation. And so that was one of the things that individual was able to progress during the course of the coaching. And when they first said that, I just thought, it took me a little while to really process and understand what that would mean, or how it would be helpful to be watching TV while doing something on the phone, and then actually sometimes would have a third thing on an iPad as well. But the need to just keep away what they were experiencing internally had got to the point that was the coping strategy they'd found to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. When you started to describe the coaching, you talked about being a listening space primarily, and with a little bit of reflection. And you didn't really allude to the idea of it having outcomes, but then in that section you just did. And I'm curious, is there a way that is there sort of a character to the nature of this coaching, or does everyone just turn up and coach the way they coach? Because in a way you can go very complex with coaching and very simple and goal-oriented. I'm curious how that's kind of showing up.
Yeah, the coaches that I've had the opportunity to connect with, both in supervision and in some, just sort of more informal calls to get to know each other as a group, have come from quite a wide variety of backgrounds. So there are some others from the sort of business world, similar to myself. Some have come from more of a counselling route into coaching, or have got a social work or even a medical professional background. So there's lots of space for people to bring that experience and so different aspects of that professional knowledge into what they do. I know that Katrina, my volunteering coordinator, has a couple of times already said, I want to align this person with you because they want to talk about something to do with their work context. So has found opportunities to utilize that, and also that hasn't always been the case. So some clients haven't particularly come with a work issue. Because the service is still in its relatively early stages, just started in May 2019, MacMillan is still building up their evaluation and evidence base. So the customers or coachees are asked to say what they would like to work on, and then they are interviewed shortly after the coaching ends, and then, if I remember right, I think it's something like 3 months and 6 months later as well. So as you can imagine, the process typically would be 12 weeks, sometimes longer, because it might get interrupted by people's treatment or other issues. So with it just having started in May last year, they've kind of established early on that it was working well and was something that MacMillan really wanted to expand, but there'll be much more further down the line to see how people have sustained, hopefully, the benefits that they've gained.
Yeah, yeah. And as a coach, is there a sort of a consistency to how the coaching is expected to be done, or do you just show up as the coach you are and just do your thing?
Yeah, so very much for us to show up as the coach that we are. So there's some some supporting documentation provided that we can use if we wish. So and there's an initial kind of chemistry call, an introduction call before the coaching begins, and then templates that can be used for capturing outcomes, for following up with clients. But that's all to use as and when it feels appropriate,
Yes,
or not.
yeah, that makes sense. So at the very start, one of the questions I started to I noticed rattling around my head was, what is the need that's being filled by this coaching, and what people are not getting if it wasn't for this?
So, oh gosh, I think this in some ways comes back to what I was saying about just that listening and sort of witnessing. So I think that um, this is reflecting on the clients that I've had the opportunity to work with so far. So it often feels as if people are kind of telling their story and in some ways retelling it to themselves to make sense of the experience that they've been having. I think, as with any coachee, to have someone who is there, can listen, can witness their experience, thoughts, emotions, but with no other agenda. They're not, the coach isn't any other part of their family or system or wider
Yeah,
circle of friends, and no judgment. And my reflection on it is, I think, perhaps having been or still being surrounded by all kinds of guidance, be it medical or family helping or other support services like MacMillan itself, whether that's around people's kind of diagnosis, prognosis, their treatment, their recovery, their return to work. It seems that there's quite a fundamental thing around people hearing their own voice again. And then, sort of more explicitly, coaches have said to me that they want to work on their identity, so who am I now, wanting to work on confidence, reconnecting with or shifting values and priorities in life. For a few people, time for me, putting myself first, because they've had their cancer has sometimes made them realize that they've not really put themselves first in their life before. For some, sort of planning, looking ahead to the future. For some, caring for others, so be that sort of their immediate circle, family, partners, and in one case for other people living with cancer at their workplace, because they were surprised and disappointed with how their particular workplace was responding to them. And sometimes at a more practical level, kind of rehearsal of conversations, possibly preparing for some difficult conversations that people think they'll need to have. So it's quite wide, but
yeah.
as you said, it can be at quite a level of depth as well.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's a lot of individual needs from all of this. And I guess the question I was having was, is there not an existing structure that provides for that? Presumably not. So this service was needed because there isn't a more formal structure.
Yeah, I guess so. So it's that I suppose it's what does the process of coaching and the skills of a coach bring to someone who's living with cancer.
Yeah.
And so it's the I guess the opportunity to work on all those things
Yeah.
with someone who I suppose who is enabling them and their individual process, rather than coming at it from an expert
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah. And it's what they call non-agentic, isn't it? It does.
Mm.
It's not being guided by an end point that the expert brings. your health or your this or your that, or it's just like what's happening for you. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about, I'm curious about many things, but one thing that's coming to mind is the challenges that poses upon you as a coach, who are perhaps, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're working in one context which is more business related, and then you go to this context, I'm curious what challenges it brings up for you, either emotionally or practically or whatever it might be, that you then have to contend with in some way.
Yeah, so I think as I was sort of approaching the recruitment process and onboarding, I was sort of worried, would I, what would I need to know about cancer? And the answer of that is not too much. So there's some orientation and some kind of grounding knowledge within the MacMillan onboarding process, which has been really helpful. But in truth, clients have spoken, pretty little about the cancer itself to me. I guess they've got lots of other people to do that with. I have made sure I make time to sort of really just think about sort of pace and say the scale of change that people want to work on, and the not it's tempting to think, well, I've got 6 sessions, so let's make sure we help people get to the outcomes they want, and often it's not really that will happen. It's trusting the process, I think, to know that will happen over the 6 sessions, but I think more than ever, just allow the space that people need. With the first couple of clients in particular, the first few sessions, words were just tumbling and tumbling out. And it seemed as if just there was a lot that was pent up. So being patient with the process, not rushing to sort of start to work on the outcomes.
Yeah. And what about yourself, Samir? Like, I mean, I realize you've just described the impact on you, but I'm curious that when you say it was tumbling out,
Mm.
to what extent were you able to manage, and likewise the colleagues that you work alongside, able to manage that tumble outness of
Mm.
emotions and data and so on?
Yeah, so oh yeah, so I do for me, I do take some notes, just sometimes to help with connections and being able to look back across a series of sessions. So it's just a real practical thing, but also listening. What's really been important has been listening for when people are very congruent about what they're saying, and that's often proved really helpful to be able to play back as part of that process of helping people hear themselves, hear their own voice. Sometimes just be seeming to say a lot of things or different options, and then something will just suddenly sound really congruent. So that's been important. And yeah, how I'm experiencing those individuals in the moment. So what I'm picking up on as strengths or values, because people have often seem to have lost connection with that. So it can sometimes feel draining. I guess you're kind of hearing a lot, holding a lot. So yeah, making sure, for me as part of my process, that I'm never back to back in terms of calls. We're asked to, as far as reasonably practicable, keep each call to an hour. It's part of creating a safe container within the process. But yeah, just making sure I've got space, both literally in time, but then kind of emotionally as well. So I'll often, as long as it's convenient also for the MacMillan customer, will make that my last call of the day.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And you
Yeah.
mentioned in passing earlier the idea that you have supervision, and I wonder if you can describe how that's provided and also what that does for you.
Sure. So supervision provided for a group of coaches, which I think was 4 on one that I was able to join, and I think there were 7 of us on the second one. It's been provided rather wonderfully, I think, by some great people and organisations. So by Kim Morgan from Barefoot, and by Julia Duncan, I think is the surname, from the Development Partnership. So people who they're really established in the coaching world and know their stuff. As an opportunity for the coaches to to reflect on and to bring any challenges from our work specifically with this client group.
Yeah. If some, I mean, part of the reason for this summit, by the way, is not just to learn from what's already, well, yeah, it's all to learn from what's already happening, but not just to hear about it, but to think if I were going to do it, what would I, how can I learn from this? And I'm wondering, how important would
Mm.
you say that supervision part is for something working in this field where there's a degree of emotional, pretty big degree of emotional vulnerability, I guess.
Yeah, I've found it really, really useful on both occasions. So I've talked about a couple of my clients who say kind of the words were tumbling out. In stark contrast to that, I had one person who had referred themselves for the service. They'd come through the website referral, and yet seem to find it really, really difficult to talk about themselves, their feelings, were long periods of silence. I would sense this is someone who is introverted by nature, but particularly, and they wanted to work on their mental and emotional well-being. So that was the territory they'd asked to step into. And yet I could sense it was incredibly hard, and because it's audio only, and now especially in the last few months we've all got so used to working with video technology, that was a real challenge for me. Other things have been raised. Sometimes the challenge of keeping continuity of relationship if the coaching is interrupted, either by in a literal way treatment, because people don't always know far in advance when they're going to get their different appointments and sessions in hospital, or by in some cases customers not letting coaches know if they needed to cancel or rearrange a session, and then just the if we felt as a coaching group, we felt guilty saying, well, is this person really committed to doing this, because we know how much is going on. And we talked about the fact that if people are in a traumatized or a survival state, either due to the physically what they're going through or emotion, then things that we might otherwise take for granted, like remembering that we've suddenly got an appointment that clashes and letting the other person know, actually people don't have capacity for that at that time. So to be able to talk openly together as a coaching community about some of those things, and work out how, either within the coaching conversations or how the coordinators for the coaching service for MacMillan can interact with customers to help work those issues through, has just been incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
And yeah, as I said, it can be emotionally draining. So that sort of restorative aspect of supervision and being able to, just share and air whatever we might need to, it's just been super helpful.
Yeah, that's great to hear. You mentioned earlier, Nia, about the way it was going to be measured. In other words, the effectiveness of the service, and it was still early days. And I wonder if you could just replay that for me, just so I understand. Because I think one of the key things with this social impact work is it's really great to do it, and it's better to do it and not measure it than not do it at all. But if you can measure it, I'd love to know what are some of the ways that people are doing this kind of thing. So could you just kind of replay that for me?
Yeah, so this is something that the wellbeing coaching coordinators carry out. So they do ask people to complete some sort of numerical evaluations. There's a number of questions where they're asked to rate on a 10-point scale before the coaching starts and at the end. But I was talking with my coordinator about this actually in advance of doing this call. She said what they found much more powerful is the sort of the qualitative data, the testimonials or the feedback that people give verbally. Just to hear the sort of the stories, and then of course you can do thematic analysis on that further down the line, so that will come out. So yeah, so it's telephone follow-ups after the coaching, using some numerical ratings before and then after, and then also really importantly capturing those sort of testimonials and verbal feedbacks.
And I seem to remember you saying it was like 3 months and 6 months. Is that right?
I
So it's
think that's
staggered.
right. Yes. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, that's fascinating. Funny enough, in another interview with somebody for the summit, they mentioned that the quantitative stuff was important, but the qualitative stuff is what's going to move politicians and funders and that sort of thing. It's the stories that's going to shape people's desire to help, not the numbers, which I found
Yeah.
fascinating, because I think it's very easy to get caught up on the number side of things.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what MacMillan found as well. It's the qualitative information that's really, really valuable.
I think the quantitative stuff's good for you knowing the internally, and the qualitative stuff is good for mobilizing people outside. You know, that's what
Yeah,
that's what this chap said anyway.
yeah. No, I would absolutely go with that.
Now I realise, Mia, that you can't really speak for, and so please just let me know if you don't know this, but you can't really speak for how it happened or some of the logistical challenges. But I'm curious if you can share any of the actual challenges of how they went from 0 to 60, so to speak, or in this case, 0 to 50,
Yep.
0 to 50 to make this happen. Like, what were some of the hurdles they had to overcome? Are you aware of any of that?
Um, I'm not sure in terms of the process of recruiting more coaches. The I think because there are great communities and networks, so I saw the position advertised. I'm pretty sure it was on an Animas community page, and then after I was recruited, they went from the first 3, took the total up to 10. So that was the group that I joined in March this year, was able to start, and then more recently it's gone from 10 to 50. So of course I asked the current coaches to say, please share this with your network. So I posted both on LinkedIn and also again in the Animas Lounge, and I had a couple of people reach out to me and say, oh, can you tell me a bit more about that? So I knew a few people that had applied and that had joined, and then we had a coaches meetup Zoom call, about 24 people on it, and there were another 4 people I think that I knew but didn't know had applied. So my sense, not having been directly involved in the recruitment other than sharing the opportunity, is that the coaching networks, and I guess if you're interested in helping people's development in a holistic sense, not just getting paid to do that, but believing in coaching as a force for good in the world, then clearly lots of people are interested in volunteering their time and
Yeah, very
skills.
much so. I mean, my impression is that the recruitment part's the easy part. It's what happens next. In my experience, both from what I've actually done for myself within Animas and also talking to other people like yourself, Mia, getting people on board and excited seems to be the easy part. And then it's like, okay, how do we go from having a load of people over here who want to do it and a load of people who over here and need it, and then creating the logistical connection between those two? And it's,
Yeah, and I know again from conversations with the volunteer coordinators that this is still something that's evolving. So MacMillan clearly have had lots of services and infrastructure with contact centres and people to, that were providing other services that could initially help with the referrals. Clearly already have processes in place around handling data. So a lot of that, there was expertise there already. The part that's still evolving somewhat is that matching customers to coaches. So the 2 coordinators obviously each know their group of volunteer coaches to some extent and what specialisms people have got, but it's hoped that we will be able to put more into the self-referral webpage to kind of help with that process. So whether that will look like coach profiles being posted so that customers can say, oh, I'd like to maybe do a short list of coaches they think they'd like to work with, or stating a bit more. At the moment the referral page doesn't ask customers to state up front what they'd like to work on. They can, but they don't need to. So that might be another way just to sort of match areas of interest or outcomes with coaches' skills. But yeah, that's I'd say would say it's still evolving. I think my experience is it's working well as it is at the moment, but from an organizational perspective for MacMillan, it's how can they make that scalable, because they want to continue to grow the service.
well, that's interesting. Now that you've raised that, I'm curious to what insight you have onto the future of this project and the ambitions for it. Are you able to share anything around that?
Not in terms of pure numbers, but yeah, they would like to do more and see it continue to grow quickly.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, it'd be interesting to know, like, because you've sort of talked about 50 coaches, and I think you mentioned the number 66 customers so
Yeah, that's
far,
right.
and
Yeah,
more going through.
yeah.
I'm curious what their big vision is.
Yeah, well, if you imagine with So the most recent recruitment campaign that's taken it from 10 to 50, literally I think has just been closed, like maybe a week or two ago, and there will be the opportunity certainly for more in the future. So then there's a few hours for people to do of the onboarding process, which you'll space out over time, some lots of online learning, and then a couple of live sessions you need to attend. So the vast majority of that 50 coaches won't be active yet. People will be completing their onboarding process. So if you said each coach is asked to volunteer 1 to 4 hours a fortnight. So if you said you've got 50 people working with, if you said it was the lower average of 2, that would be 100 customers at any one time. Or if it was, each coach had capacity to work with 3, then it would be 150 people at a time. That's going to cycle around roughly every 12 weeks.
Yeah.
So I'm not good enough at maths to do that in my head, but you could kind of say, well, okay, on that basis, over the course of a year,
Yeah.
you could work out how many people you could reasonably expect to support this way.
That's great. You mentioned the onboarding. I should have kind of talked about this earlier when you said it earlier, but because at one level you're saying the coach just does their coaching as the coach they are, and you don't need to know particularly about cancer as you described it. So what does the onboarding seek to achieve? What's the aim of it?
Yeah, so in the onboarding there is information about cancer and different forms of treatment, and combinations of things like information to read, and then also some really powerful and moving videos interviewing people who've lived with cancer, talking about things like how is it to talk about this to friends and family. How is it to be thinking about, what will I be able to do in work, depending on the outcomes of my treatment, side effects. How will it be, how might my finances be affected by this if I can't work for a period of time? So there's information around what cancer is and what it can do to people's lives, and then also onboarding around safeguarding. So if we come across any other concerns around people's well-being or their environment, onboarding information around data protection, and both for the coachees, the customers, but also for you yourself. So those practical parts are covered as well, and then also again practically how to use the MacMillan systems. So I've got each coach has a MacMillan email address, and you can access the systems and the information you need. So there's a calendar, for example, so that the coordinators can see when your sessions are happening. So that's all online, but just if people haven't used those particular systems before, to be able to do that.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So Mia, we've come to the end of our conversation. It's been really great. And by the way, I want to acknowledge the work you're doing and all of the people in that project. It sounds so important. So congratulations sounds twee, but you know what I mean? Congratulations on being part of it. I wonder if you
thank
can
you.
just... Yeah, sorry, go on. Yeah.
So to say it's kind of been, it's really rewarding to do, and you said at the beginning around sort of fitting that in. For me, having been freelance for coming up 3 years now, now I've got things working quite well. I had the time, much more so than I ever had in a full-time consultancy role, and it's just important to me to find a way. And this is flexible. It's an amount of time that fits in well. So yeah, I was just delighted to have the opportunity to join.
That's great. And you mentioned at the very start, when we were talking before the interview, that you have a website that people can go to be on a waiting list to become a coach, but also if they want to actually be referred to a coach. Perhaps you can let me have that, and I'll put it in the text of this presentation.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. So there's a website for people that could benefit from using the service. So if anyone watching this either could themselves or knows of someone who could take up the wellbeing coaching service, and then the email address for the coordinators if coaches would like to go on the waiting list for the next round of recruitment.
Wonderful. Mia, thank you so much for being with me today.
Oh, thank you, Nick.